Hey, AP government guys, we're going to continue our conversation about the budget, and we are going to get into kind of the second half of that conversation. I'm going to try to go through a lot of notes today, and just try to get them done as you can. Okay, just one slide at a time. Again, listen to the things I'm talking about because you will see them again. A couple of things. I had mentioned earlier this week, I think to you guys, a boldface term vocab quiz on Friday. I want to make I want to make a few adjustments to the Flexi quiz, or just to my utilization of Flexi quiz, just because I was using it for the first time. But what that's going to mean is that we end up pushing that quiz that I had talked about into next week. I promise we will take it. A lot of you guys said you found it helpful, so I don't want to take that away from you. I want you to, take that quiz. It will be probably using one of those quiz interfaces that we had spoken about before. Let's go ahead and get into the budget a little bit and reviewing a little bit of what we'd gone over before. I will tell you that I'm going to try something a little bit different today. We're going to try to watch a video on Zoom. I'm going to see if that can even work. I think the recording can pick up its own audio. If it doesn't, then you're welcome. Then you're welcome to just turn it off. But I think it's going to help illustrate a few things as far as specifically the debt ceiling, which we will talk about today. I don't think I mentioned this before. So last time, the reason I put this up here, and it should be pretty clear now, that this COVID-19 situation, I mean, this is a big part of the budget and not something that was expected. And, I know I mentioned it during current events today, but it's $2 trillion that came out of nowhere, right? And so the government has to account for that. That's going to go into things like our debt. And this was a form of discretionary spending, which we will talk about today, a form of discretionary spending that took a huge chunk of our federal budget this year. And it'll be curious to see how they end up handling future programs as a result. But as we know, it contributes to that debt problem. So we spoke about the budget and we talked about what exactly is in the budget, the fact that we're talking about revenues weighed against that of expenditures and the balance between those two things. So we got through that and we determined that the United States typically runs a budget deficit, right? And that there are taxes that the government generates as revenue that really don't make up for it. But those two types of taxes, the primary source of income, there's other taxes, but is going to be the income tax, which was established by Amendment 16. So we got through all that, I believe, and I think we got through here. And that brings us here. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the debt ceiling. And as I promised, there would be a video associated with it. We will show it a little bit later. But the debt ceiling, all it is a self-imposed limit on how much the government can borrow. Okay, so it's Congress's attempt to be fiscally responsible. There are a lot of people who call into question its effectiveness, because the fact of the matter is that when the government absolutely needs to raise the debt ceiling, they do, okay? And usually that's at the last possible minute. And it's essentially the Congress setting its own rules, feeling like they need to break them, and instead of just breaking them, changing the rule itself. So essentially breaking the rule that they made. And going about things that way. So it can be changed by Congress, as we said. And then there's another concept, and my econ guys, or former econ guys, Kalizzi, White, this should look familiar to you, this idea of automatic stabilizers. So Automatic stabilizers are exactly as they sound. And think of it the same way as perhaps an autopilot. Okay, so when you put a airplane on autopilot, what is it doing? It is driving itself, right? And that's the idea behind automatic stabilizers. So when we talk about automatic stabilizers, I want you to think about changes in government income caused by the business cycle. Okay, so there is no policy that's taking place. That's an important point. In fact, go ahead and write that in there. No policy is taking place as a result of this. The way they're happening is it's all a result of this business cycle. The business cycle is changing the amount of income coming into the government. So for example, when the economy is at this point, what would this point be? You could argue that we might even be there now, a recession, right? Or a trough, when the economy is in a trough. How are incomes compared to maybe the way they were a few years prior? They would be lower, right? Because employers find they can't pay their workers as much. Maybe they cut workers, so they're not getting an income at all. But overall, incomes have changed, okay? And that is not an official congressional policy. Congress doesn't have to make a policy, but there has been less income. And because there's less income, there is less income tax revenue generated. On the government spending side of things, what you'll see is entitlement programs. There are more people signing up for government entitlement programs. Unemployment. Why is there more unemployment? Well, we're in a recession. So there's got to be people who get involved in those programs. So, Medicare, Medicaid. There are going to be more people who are looking to the government for financial compensation. So recession automatically means less income generated as revenue. This is autopilot for the government. They're not making a policy, it's just happening. Okay. Federal expenditures. As we should probably be aware, this has increased steadily over the course of the past few years, and there's several reasons for this. You can't point to it for just one reason. For example, and this should be a number. So make this number 1. Okay, make this number 1. The size of the federal government has increased as people look to the government to do more. Okay, so because the federal government's increasing, that gives us more power, more influence, and people are going to expect the government ends up getting involved in the intricacies of their lives in more ways because it has more power and more money to do so. Defense spending. And this is really, all you got to do is look at this graph down here. And this is reason 2, by the way, reason 2, not reason B. This graph down here illustrates what exactly has happened to defense spending. So, you look at this, and what you'll see is that in terms of spending, and this little spike here would be World War I, there's World War II, but then what happens after that? We're almost perpetually in all of these wars or all of these conflicts all over the place. And this is, and you can tell this is even considering, inflationary changes. So, and really, it's not because we're in perpetual war, but we've got people in other countries that are military bases, other countries, whether it's South Korea, whether it's Germany, which, those bases have remained there since then, but that continue to exist. And the size of our military is really greater than ever. Many people think that's a good thing, but either way you slice it, it means that defense spending is way out of proportion than when it was prior to World War II. You look at World War I as probably the most economically conservative in terms of defense spending for a war that I've ever seen. But then again, we weren't very involved in that war. Rise of entitlement programs. So New programs have been created. Entitlement just means things that people have to qualify for. So, the Great Society, New Deal programs, meaning like unemployment programs, Great Society programs, meaning like Medicare and Medicaid, you have to be of a certain age or you have to be of a certain income in order to qualify for those programs. And those are set in stone. The government cannot change or cannot cut prices to those things. Incrementalism. And all this is it's the idea that inflation has taken place. And so because inflation has taken place, it's going to make the value of the dollar less. So we've got to spend more money as a result. And because we're doing that and we're not cutting from programs that were created the previous year, we will always be spending more, at least more, at minimum the same. So we're spending as much in 2019 as we are in 2020, plus things like this coronavirus outbreak, which are adding another $2 trillion to it. There are several problems with this. One is uncontrollable expenditures. There's no easy way to cut these. If you try to cut Medicare, for example, there are going to be a lot of older people who are upset. If you try to raise the retirement age from 65 to 70, there are going to be people within that 65 to 70, or even, that people in their 50s who are going to be upset about that. The fact of the matter is that there's no, that it's not, the Social Security's proven that it's not a sustainable program. And so we're going to run into some pretty harsh realities years down the road when we're trying to figure out what the hell do we do when we have so many old people and not enough people in the workforce. And then entitlements, and then interest on the debt would be another example of something that's completely uncontrollable, as well as entitlements, which we mentioned before. And then, so the issue is that beneficiaries, and I created this as a separate reason because I think it is important. Beneficiaries, there are more beneficiaries than there are workers, and that's becoming more of a problem, not less of a problem. So there has to be some austerity measures, and all austerity measures means there has to be some discretion in how we do that. Okay. So mandatory versus discretionary spending. The annual budget must address two types of spending. One is discretionary. This is fixed cost, and they're brought about by law, and they have a definite beginning and definite ending. So if I tell you, Malik James, to use your own discretion in taking notes, or use your own discretion in the time to study for the test, what am I doing? I'm telling you that you are using your own judgment. And it's the same thing with the government. When they are doing discretionary spending in coronavirus, the $2 trillion for the coronavirus is a great example. They're seeing a need, right? And they're saying, okay, there's a problem. Government needs to address it. We can address it through spending. We'll spend this amount of money, put it in this program, here you go. And so that happens. It has a definite beginning. We know when that law was passed and when it wasn't, and it has a definite ending. That's different from, say, entitlement programs, because they always exist. That's what we refer to as mandatory spending. They are always there. So Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid are the biggest ones. And there are problems with this. The biggest problem is if mandatory spending is always there and it always has to be done, and it only increases, that means that you've got less and less time or less and less room for discretionary spending, especially if it's increasing at a pace that's not commensurate with inflation. There's less and less room for discretionary spending. And so when it tops out, when it surpasses revenue, then we see more borrowing. The other thing is log rolling. We talked about log rolling before, this idea of, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. If you pass my legislation, even though I might not be of the same party or I might be opposed to your legislation, I will pass yours as well, because we both need the votes in order to get this legislation passed. Pork barrel spending, we've spoken about that before. That is, and I'll remind you, and if you don't remember, please do write it. In fact, go ahead and just write down what pork barrel registration is, or a pork barrel spending is. It is when legislatures are able to get federal grants for their constituents, but everyone else's constituents, it's at the expense of everyone else in the United States. So, for example, I'm not going to see the benefit of a grant, a federal grant to improve the highways and byways in New York, okay, or a federal grant to improve education in Minnesota. All right, those are things that do not benefit me, even though my federal tax dollars are going there. Legislators love it, because then they can turn back to their constituents and say, look what I'm doing for you. Either way, whether you're talking about log rolling or whether you're talking about pork barrel spending, you're talking about potentially wasteful spending. The budgetary process. One, you should know it's very political. We're going to talk about one, how it should work, and then the other way, how it actually works. So how it should work, what you'll notice is that they're completely two different things. So the budgetary process, very, very political. The actual process goes a lot like this. The president submits approval to Congress, and what Congress will then do is they will get together in committee, have the legislative process play out. Remember, what's the primary place they are making these decisions? It's got to be in committee. It's in their standing committee. They're working on these proposals and they're coming up with ideas. You'll see the House and Senate end up compromising on different versions and creating a version that is penultimate between the two. And then you've got budget reconciliation, changing existing laws in order to make it work. Maybe they have to change the qualifications for Medicare. Maybe they have to change the qualifications for Medicaid. Maybe they have to change or remove laws altogether that are already in place. The point of the matter is, and the reason this is so effective, is because when it gets to the Senate, they can't be filibustered. So if you have a slim majority, a slim majority in the Senate, that's one less barrier that's in the way to stop that bill from getting passed. I think I missed something. Hold on. Nope, I sure did not. All right, so how does it actually work? Well, President is going to propose a budget. Congress will ignore it. This is how it played out in 2018. You may remember Trump had been in office for a couple of years, and there was a lot of conflict between him and Congress. By the time Congress ends up changing over in 2018, we end up having a new Congress. That Congress in the House of Representatives was Democrat, and the Republicans had a narrow lead in the Senate. So Congress would ignore the president's proposal. The thing is that president has to ask Congress, because Congress has the power of the purse. Instead, Congress is going to come up with its own version, unsuccessfully, because it's 535 people, and they can't agree easily on their own version of the budget. All groups involved are going to wait until the last possible minute, and then when that occurs, so a possible government shutdown is where we see this, and in 2018 we saw the biggest shutdown in history just over this subject. The fact that there was a concern that if the government, if you're not going to approve this budget, then I've got to shut down the government, because the government will not have the funds by which to operate, and I need to make sure that they do. After that, Congress passes resolutions to continue as normal, and the president signs. Again, a very political process, and that's how it ends up working each time. I hope that hope that unmuddies the waters a little bit for you guys. I am going to try to. I'm not going to worry about the video today. I might show it. Tomorrow. So it'll at least help. Maybe it is a difficult topic. I know the past couple units have not been as exciting as maybe the ones we had gone over before. But always when I hear something brought up from someone else or in a different context, maybe somebody other than me, maybe you don't like my face, then it can be helpful. All right. Anyway, keep working hard, guys. Thank you for indulging me, and I will see you later.